All right, guys, a couple things we want to show you about aggregate supply and demand, which is what really makes it different than supply and demand. If you look at this first graph here, right, here's our basic graph. We have our price level for the whole economy, real GDP adjusted for inflation, aggregate supply, aggregate demand. In the middle, we have our equilibrium, just like we did before. However, this equilibrium is going to be a lot more significant. If we follow our equilibrium over, our dotted lines here, to the y-axis, this indicates our price level. This shows us if we have inflation. So anytime the price level rises above the equilibrium, that means that we are getting inflation in the economy. Anytime that a shift causes it to go below the equilibrium, that's where we find deflation or prices dropping in the economy. If we follow the equilibrium down to the x-axis, this is where we get what we say is y, okay, or our total output. This is how much we're producing. So Y is called total output, but what it really means is GDP. So Y represents our GDP. So if we move this way from equilibrium, this means that we have more GDP, which means more output. And because we have more output, we have less unemployment. And if we go the opposite way, if it goes below equilibrium, back this way, that means that we have a decrease in GDP, which causes an increase in unemployment. So if we look at the shifters now, you can see how these happen on the graph. So we'll start with aggregate demand. If aggregate demand increases, right, the only thing that can increase aggregate demand is an increase in GDP. Aggregate demand will shift to the right, AD1. So if you look at our first equilibrium, here was our price level, and here was our output. At the new equilibrium, our PL1, you can see that price levels have risen. So because of an increase in spending, we have increased our price level, causing inflation. If we do our other dotted line at Y1, you can see that we have moved to the right, which means GDP has increased and unemployment has decreased, right? That's a good thing to have. Everyone's working, but we're spending money, so we gotta be watching that inflation. If we look over here, right, aggregate demand can move if GDP goes up. It can also move if GDP decreases, it goes down. So let's say the government cuts spending. So if we have our initial equilibrium, price level 1, output 1. So now, 81, okay? So GDP has decreased, so aggregate demand has decreased and shift to the left. At the new equilibrium, PL1. Okay, so you can see that the price level has dropped. We are having a little bit of deflation in the economy. I'll do Y2 down here. So here, you can see that our output has gone this way, which means GDP has decreased, so unemployment has increased. So changes in aggregate demand, if we increase, we get inflation. If we decrease, we get unemployment. So this goes back to the idea that inflation and unemployment are on that seesaw trying to balance. All right, aggregate supply is where it gets a little different, okay? So with aggregate supply, we said the biggest thing is going to be the input cost. That's the most typical thing that we're gonna see. So we have our initial equilibrium, just like with demand, price level, and Y, okay? So let's say that the businesses are investing in new technology, lots of capital investment. Aggregate supply is going to increase. Right, at our new equilibrium, PL1, you can see that price has dropped. At this new equilibrium here, Y1, you can see that output has gone up. So now we have decreased prices with more output, okay? So we have deflation here with GDP going up and unemployment going down. This right here, this one, is what we call the best case in the economy. This means we have economic growth, right? That's the best thing that can happen because prices went down while output went up, right? So have decrease in prices and a decrease in unemployment is hard to do, but it is the best thing that can happen in our economy. And that's also when we looked at PPC, what caused that movement. Right? With a decrease in aggregate supply, this is something like a hurricane takes out the oil supply. Here's our initial equilibrium. If we shift aggregate supply to the left, you can see our new equilibrium at PL1. The price level has gone up, so we have inflation. And now at the new Y1, you can see that production has gone down, our output has dropped. So GDP has decreased, which means unemployment has increased. So now you have the opposite of economic growth. We have an increase in inflation and an increase in unemployment, which is the worst case for the economy, and this is what we talked about with stagflation. This is the worst thing that can happen because your production is going down, people are losing their jobs, and prices is going up. So imagine how awful it would be to not have a paycheck, but everything got more expensive. Okay, so using these examples, I would highly recommend writing your own versions of this on your own sheet of paper, and this should definitely help you do the practice in your packet.